The groan of the old wooden stairs was the only music this house had played for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. I didn't keep a written tally. A man just knows. Time for me wasn't measured in clocks anymore, but in the thick, heavy silence. Every step I took down into the basement echoed with a low, protesting moan, as if the very frame of the house was sighing along with me. Tired of the quiet, tired of the emptiness. The name's Frank, 70 years old. I remember when that number seemed like a distant planet, a place other old men lived. Now, it was my address. Vietnam vet, retired auto mechanic, a man who'd owned his own garage for 40 years, and, most recently, a widower. That last title, etched onto my soul with a rusty nail, was the heaviest. It weighed more than my rucksack in the monsoon-soaked jungles of '69. It weighed more than any V8 engine I'd ever hoisted. It weighed the same as a whole life, when the reason for it all gets pulled right out from under you. The air in the basement was thick, still, and cold. It smelled of layered time, damp concrete, the sweet rot of aging wood, and the faint, dusty scent of things long forgotten. A single, bare 100-watt bulb, hanging from a twisted wire, cast sharp, ugly shadows, turning familiar piles of junk into the hunched silhouettes of sleeping monsters. There was the old couch Michael and Sarah had grown up on, its springs poking out like broken ribs, stacks of yellowed newspapers tied with twine, a chronicle of a world that didn't exist anymore. I'd come down here for the Christmas decorations. The idea itself was so absurd, it felt like a sickness. What in the hell was Christmas without Eleanor? She didn't just love the holiday, she was Christmas. She was the smell of cinnamon and pine needles that filled the house, the quiet rustle of wrapping paper late at night, the warm glow of the lights reflecting in her eyes. Folks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so more people can hear this story. And do me a favor, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know where you're listening from. But I'd made her a promise. One of her last nights in the sterile white of the hospice room, when her breath had become as faint as a whisper of wind, she'd squeezed my calloused hand with what little strength she had left. "Frankie," she'd whispered, "don't stop putting up the lights. Even when I'm gone, especially when I'm gone. Do it for you. Promise me. And me, I'm an old soldier. I was trained to follow orders. A promise made to her was the only law I still followed. So, with my knees creaking like the stairs, I descended into this tomb of memories to carry out her final command. I made my way to the far corner, the darkest part of the basement. Her neat, cursive handwriting, unchanged for 50 years, labeled each box. Ornaments, glass careful. Tinsel and garland, tree topper, 1985. I ran a finger over the faded ink of that last one. For nearly 40 years, that golden star had crowned our tree. I remembered us buying it at a flea market, the first Christmas after Michael was born. It cost $3, a fortune for us back then. Ellie's eyes lit up when she saw it. I made a show of haggling the guy down to $2.50 and felt like a king. I pulled down the top box, the one marked lights. It shifted with a dry, papery sound, and a cloud of dust, disturbed for the first time in a year, maybe more, danced in the dim light like a swarm of ghostly gnats. Underneath it was another box, a smaller one I didn't recognize. Plain, anonymous gray cardboard, sealed with yellowing packing tape that had started to peel at the edges. It was shoved carelessly between a stack of old National Geographic magazines and a wooden crate of tools I hadn't touched since I sold the garage. Something about its namelessness, its stark utility among the festive boxes, made a cold dread trickle down my spine. I set the box of lights on the concrete floor and took this new one with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, not the weight of books or tools. This was a dense, settled, dead weight. I placed it on my old workbench, wiped away a thick cobweb that looked like a strand of gray hair, and peeled back the tape. The cardboard flaps fell open. Inside, wrapped in a clear plastic bag, was a simple, dark gray plastic container. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I knew that container. I'd seen one just like it only once before, on a day my mind had tried its best to burn away, to erase like a bad memory. The day I stood in a small, quiet room at the crematorium, and a polite young man in a dark suit handed this exact type of box to my son Michael. The basement tilted, and I grabbed the edge of the workbench to steady myself. My hands, which had held greasy engine parts, a rifle, and my own newborn children, began to tremble. There was a sticker on the lid, a small, white rectangle with printed text. I leaned in, squinting in the dim light as if refusing to read what I already knew. Eleanor May Wallace, 1955 to 2024. The air rushed out of my lungs in a ragged gasp. I stared at the name, at the dates, and my mind refused to process it. It couldn't be. Not here. Not like this. Not in this damp, forgotten corner. I remembered the day of the funeral through a thick fog. My children, Michael and Sarah, had taken care of everything. Don't you worry about a thing, Dad. You just rest. We've got this. I didn't worry. I didn't have the strength. I was a shell, hollowed out and empty. I sat in the church pew, listened to the preacher talk about heaven, and felt nothing. I trusted them, my kids, the two people I'd built my world for. They wouldn't. But they had. She was here. She'd been here the whole time, 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. My Ellie, the love of my life, the woman whose hand I held until it grew cold, the woman whose laughter was the soundtrack to my entire existence, was in a cheap plastic box in my dusty basement. Forgotten, hidden, discarded like a piece of old junk next to the damn Christmas decorations. The irony was so cruel, so twisted, it was like a punch to the gut. The woman who was the living embodiment of light and warmth and celebration had ended up here, in the dark, amongst the spiders and the mildew. I sank onto an overturned bucket, unable to take my eyes off the box. The grief I had locked away for almost a year, kept behind a steel door, finally broke free. But this wasn't clean, simple grief. It was polluted. It was filthy. It was a sharp, jagged feeling I'd never felt before. Humiliation. It was a profound, soul-crushing humiliation, as if they hadn't just disrespected me, but had wiped their muddy boots on my entire life. I had been a quiet man, stayed quiet when I came back from the war, because you can't explain that hell to people who haven't walked through it. Stayed quiet working late nights in the garage to make sure my kids had better than I ever did. Stayed quiet when they grew up and started talking to me like I was a worn-out appliance they didn't know how to fix. I thought my silence was strength. I thought it was dignity. But now, looking at my wife's ashes, I finally understood. To them, my silence was permission. Permission to disrespect. Permission to devalue. Permission to forget. I let out a bitter, silent laugh. If I'd known I'd end up a ghost in my own family photos, I whispered, to the cold, damp air, I would have bought myself a boat and sailed off into the sunset instead of putting a down payment on their houses. I sat there on that bucket until my legs went numb. I picked up the box. It felt cold as a stone. I held it to my chest, like I used to hold Ellie when she cried, and I slowly, unsteadily, climbed the stairs back into the light. I surfaced into the kitchen. The bright morning light pouring through the window over the sink was a physical blow after the basement's gloom. I set the gray box on the center of the oak dining table, right where Eleanor's place setting had always been. Her spot, now occupied by all that was left of her. I sat in my own chair across from it and just stared. The house was dead quiet, but a roaring hurricane of memories was tearing through my head, and that plastic container was its eye. It wasn't just ashes. It was an anchor, dragging me down into the deep, forcing me to relive and re-examine every piece of the life I thought I knew. I remembered the day we met. July 1975. Hot, sticky, and miserable. I'd been back from Saigon for 6 months, but in my head, I was still slogging through rice paddies. The world I'd left had vanished. The one I returned to was foreign, and it looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I was a gear that didn't fit in the new machine. I was pumping gas at Old Man Hemlock Station on the edge of town, saying as little as possible, avoiding eye contact. Eyes were the worst. They held questions I couldn't answer, and judgments I didn't deserve. Then one afternoon, a beat-up Volvo, the color of a faded sky, sputtered into the station, coughing and choking, running on little more than fumes and stubbornness. And then she got out. Eleanor. I remember it clearly. She didn't just get out, she seemed to float out, wearing a simple sundress with little blue flowers on it, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She smiled at me, and that smile was the first real sunshine I'd felt in years. It wasn't a smile of pity or curiosity. It was just a smile. "I think my old girl's finally given up the ghost," she said, nodding at the car. And me, a guy who had been communicating in grunts for months, I heard myself say, "Nothing a little listening to can't fix." Engines are like people. Sometimes they just need someone to pay attention. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. And for a moment, it drowned out the phantom thumping of helicopter blades in my head. She didn't ask about the war. She asked my name. And when I told her, she said it back to me. "Frank, that's a good solid name." I fixed her carburetor that day for free and asked her out for a cup of coffee. We were married a year later, a dirt-cheap wedding at the little white chapel on the hill. Maybe 10 people there. I had one good suit, and she wore a white dress she'd sewn herself. We didn't have a pot to piss in, but it didn't matter. We had each other. I got a job as a mechanic at Jimmy Carson's garage. I was good with my hands. Engines made sense to me in a way people didn't. It was honest work. It was greasy and hard, and at the end of the day, I smelled of gasoline and sweat, but every dollar had a purpose. A down payment on our little house with the creaky front porch, a crib for our first baby, a future. I sat there at the table, lost in the memory of nights spent in the garage I eventually bought from Jimmy. Michael had a bad case of pneumonia when he was a kid. He needed some new, expensive antibiotic the insurance barely touched. I took on any side job I could get. I worked on truckers' rigs after hours, fixed old farm equipment that was too broken down to bring in during the day. I'd come home long after midnight, when Ellie and the kids were asleep. I'd strip down on the back porch so I didn't track grease into the house, shower as quietly as I could, and slip into bed beside her. I'd just lie there, listening to her breathe. It was the most peaceful sound in the world. And every morning when I left before dawn, there'd be a thermos of black, steaming coffee and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper waiting for me on the counter. That was her love language, not words. We weren't big on words. She just knew. She knew every scraped knuckle, every aching muscle, every drop of sweat was my way of saying I love you. The kids grew. Michael, smart as a whip, was the first in our family to go to college. We didn't have that kind of money, so I sold my '68 Ford Mustang. Midnight blue. I'd spent years restoring that car, bolt by bolt. It was my one selfish thing. I told Michael it was just an old gas guzzler, nickel and diming me to death. He believed me, or maybe he just wanted to. The money from that car paid for his first year. I remember watching its taillights disappear down the street and feeling like a part of me had been amputated. But then I'd picture my son's face on a college campus, and the ache would dull. Sarah, our artist, wanted to be a designer. She needed a fancy Apple computer that cost more than my first car. That meant another 6 months of working Saturdays. Ellie took a part-time job shelving books at the library in the evenings to help out. We ate macaroni and cheese and canned soup for what felt like an eternity. But the look on Sarah's face when she unboxed that sleek machine, pure, unadulterated joy. I'd have eaten sawdust for a year to see that look. We were a team, a well-oiled machine. Ellie was the captain, the one at the helm. I was the engine room. Down in the belly of the ship, loud, hot, and out of sight, just making sure everything kept moving forward. The passengers, our kids, got to their destinations, taking the smooth ride for granted. And we never expected a thank you. Does an engine expect a thank you from the wheels? It just does its job. Then Ellie got sick. It came on slow, like rust. First, she was just tired. Then she started forgetting things. Keys in the refrigerator. The name of the neighbor we'd known for 20 years. When we'd mention it to the kids, they'd say, "Dad, she's just getting older. It's normal." But I saw the light in her eyes dimming, like a battery dying in the cold. The diagnosis, early onset dementia, was a death sentence delivered in installments. I became her memory, her hands, her feet. I fed her with a spoon when she forgot how. I read her favorite Jane Austen novels aloud when her eyes couldn't track the words anymore. I bathed her, dressed her, and carried her to bed when her legs gave out. Those were the hardest and most meaningful years of my life. I was paying back my debt, a debt for that first smile, for every thermos of coffee, for 50 years of quiet understanding. The kids helped, from a distance. They'd send money. They hired a home care nurse for a few hours a day so I could get a break. They didn't get it. I didn't want a break. I wanted to be with her. I wanted every last second. The day she died in my arms, a part of me died with her. The part that could feel anything other than duty and exhaustion just evaporated. At the funeral, Michael, in his expensive suit, gave a polished eulogy, said all the right things about a loving mother, the heart of the family, an irreplaceable loss. Sarah stood beside him, a tragic figure in black, accepting condolences. I looked at them, and they seemed like strangers playing a part in a play. And I was the only person in the audience. And now, sitting here in the crushing silence of my kitchen, the fog finally cleared. The whole ugly picture snapped into focus. I remembered Michael taking the container from the man at the crematorium. He'd put a hand on my shoulder, using his calm, managerial voice. "Dad, I'll hold on to this for now. No need for you to have it sitting around the house. We'll all decide what to do later." I just nodded. I didn't have the strength to decide anything. I trusted him. My son. The boy I gave my Mustang and my youth to. And he took his mother, stuck her in a cardboard box, and hid her in the basement. Out of sight, out of mind, so she wouldn't clutter up his well-managed life. I looked up at the gray box. It didn't seem heavy anymore. It was empty. as empty as my children's promises, as empty as their so-called love. I slowly pushed my chair back and walked to the old rotary phone on the wall. It was time to make a call. Not to scream, not to accuse. I was too old and too tired for that. It was time for a quiet conversation. The kind they deserved. A week went by, a week of thick, suffocating quiet. The gray box remained on the kitchen table. I'd taken to covering it with an old lace doily Ellie had made, as if that could lend it some dignity. I ate my toast and drank my coffee in its silent company every morning. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to it. "Well, Ellie, look at us now. Some retirement, huh?" A bitter irony was the only spice I had left. Part of me wondered if I was losing my mind. Another clearer part knew I was finally finding it, like waking up from a long, delirious fever. I knew I had to call. I'd put it off for 7 days, playing out 100 different versions of the conversation in my head. In the end, I knew there was no way to prepare. You just had to dial. No accusations, no rage. Just a question. A mechanic looking for the source of the breakdown. My thumb, thick and clumsy, hovered over the contact labeled Michael. He was the oldest, the one who always talked about taking ownership. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. His voice was bright and full of energy, the background noise of a busy office buzzing behind him. "Dad!" "Hey, good to hear from you. Everything okay?" Sarah and I were getting a little worried. You went off the grid. Worried. I had to stifle a humorless laugh. "Everything's the same as always, Michael." "Quiet," I said, my voice steady. "The house is too big for one." "Yeah, I bet," he said quickly. "Listen, I was just thinking the other day. We should really come down and help you clear out some of that old junk from the basement and the attic." Junk. He'd called her life, her treasures, our memories, junk. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. I took a deep, slow breath. "Easy, Frank. Easy." "I already got started, Michael," I said. "And I found something. The box, with Mom's ashes. It was in the basement, behind the tool crate." The line went silent. Not a guilty silence. A calculating one. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed the information and formulated a response. Right. That," he finally said, and his tone held no surprise, no shame, no remorse, just a faint, unmistakable note of irritation, as if I'd uncovered a minor logistical error, a forgotten item on a to-do list. "Yeah, I remember. Look, Dad, you gotta understand, they were chaotic back then. The funeral, all of it." Sarah and I, we figured it would take time to decide on the right thing to do. You know, a plot at the cemetery, a niche in a mausoleum. That stuff is crazy expensive, and you'd never said what you wanted. We decided to put the box somewhere safe and was out of the way for a while, so it wouldn't be sitting out, upsetting you every day. Safe and out of the way, next to a leaky water heater and field mice. So it wouldn't upset me. Me? The man who had held her hand as she slipped away? "And I guess in 11 months, you couldn't find the time?" I asked, keeping my voice as flat as a highway in Nebraska. 11 months to bury your own mother." "Dad, come on. You know what our lives are like," he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "The job, the kids, the mortgage, soccer practice. It's a meat grinder. I was sure Sarah was going to call you about it. We talked about it. She must have gotten swamped. I'll get on her case about it, don't worry." And just like that, he expertly passed the buck to his sister. Classic Michael, a master of corporate deflection. always knew how to keep his own hands clean. The call with Sarah, which came an hour later, was even worse. Clearly prepped by her brother, she burst into tears the second I mentioned the basement. "Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible daughter, just the worst." Her sobs sounded so fake, so theatrical, it made my stomach turn. Everything just fell on me at once. Jake was having trouble in school, little Emily developed allergies, work was a nightmare. I put the box in the basement. I swear I thought it was the safest, most respectful place. I was so scared it would get lost or the kids would knock it over. I was trying to do the right thing, Daddy, I promise. Trying to do the right thing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And apparently, it leads directly to my basement. "We have to fix this, Daddy. Right away," she declared through her crocodile tears. "We'll all come down this weekend. All of us. We'll figure it out. We'll have a beautiful ceremony. Get the best spot. Whatever you want. Just please don't be upset." I hung up the phone without another word. They didn't get it. Not a single damn part of it. To them, this was a mistake. An oversight. A clerical error. They didn't see the betrayal. They didn't see the profound, soul-deep disrespect. To them, their mother's remains were an inconvenient task on a checklist. Something to be handled, like a leaky faucet or a dentist appointment. And then, 2 days later, on Friday evening, the second blow landed. The phone rang again. It was Michael. This time, his tone was completely different. It wasn't defensive or apologetic. It was businesslike, crisp, and slightly condescending. The voice he probably used with junior employees who weren't meeting their quarterly goals. "Dad, hey. So, Sarah and I did a lot of talking," he began, no preamble. "And we've come to a decision. And we're sure it's what's best for everyone. This house. It's just too big for you. It's obvious. The upkeep, the cleaning, the yard work, and all the memories. It can't be healthy, rattling around in there alone." I stayed silent, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I knew where this was going. "Anyway, there's a fantastic place. It's called The Golden Years. It's an upscale assisted living community, about 20 miles out of town. 5-star dining, 24/7 medical staff, activities, social clubs, a pool. You could connect with people your own age. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We'll sell the house and the money will more than cover the cost of the facility for years, with a little left over for me and Sarah to manage for you." Click. It was a small, quiet sound inside my head, but it was as final as a chambered round. The sound of something essential. Something that had been holding me together for decades, finally snapping. Patience. Hope. The last, stubborn illusion that I was still a father in a family, and not just an asset on a balance sheet. They hadn't just forgotten their mother in the basement. They were now trying to put me in one. A fancier one, with a swimming pool and a nice name, but a storage unit all the same. Put him away. Get him out of sight. So he's not a problem. So he's not a living, breathing reminder of their own failures. They wanted to sell the house I had built with my own 2 hands. The house where every creaky floorboard was a friend. The house that still smelled faintly of Ellie's apple pies. They wanted to liquidate our entire life. It was the second blow, and it was a knockout. "You think about it, Dad," Michael finished, his voice full of false warmth. "It's the most logical, sensible solution for everyone. We'll be there tomorrow, Saturday, around lunchtime. We can talk through the details. I even got a preliminary call in with the best realtor in the county. He can stop by and do a walkthrough." "Okay," I said, my own voice sounding strange and distant. "Come by tomorrow, for lunch. We'll talk." He seemed genuinely pleased with my compliance. "Great, Dad. Knew you'd see it our way. You were always a practical man. See you tomorrow." I hung up the phone. The room swam before my eyes. I looked at the gray box on the table. They wanted to take everything. The house, the memories, my dignity. All they had left me with was this box, and in that moment of absolute desolation, I knew what I had to do. Not yell, not argue. That was their game, not mine. I had to act, quietly, firmly, like a man, like I always had when something was broken and needed to be fixed for good. They wanted to talk details tomorrow. Fine. I had a night and a morning to prepare my own agenda for that meeting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the old wooden rocking chair on the back porch, the one where Ellie and I had watched 1,000 sunsets bleed across the sky. I held a cold cup of coffee in my hands. A raw November wind whipped through the bare branches of the oak tree we'd planted when Michael was born, its dark limbs like skeletal fingers against the graying sky. I didn't feel the cold. I was numb. The fire inside me had burned down to a hard, cold ember of pure resolve. They'd called the place the Golden Years. I let out a dry, bitter laugh into the darkness. My golden years were right here, in this house, with that woman. They were in the smell of cut grass and the grease under my fingernails. They were in the sound of my children's laughter when they were small. What they were offering me wasn't a golden year. It was a waiting room for death, gift-wrapped with a 3-course meal plan. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted to solve a problem. Old dad, old house, 2 inconvenient assets they could liquidate in one tidy transaction. They want to put me in a box, I thought. Fine, I'll get in my own damn box and drive away. The idea came suddenly, sharp and clear. My box. My old, faithful 1995 Ford F-150 sitting in the garage. It was older than my grandkids, but unlike my children, it had never once let me down. That truck was more than just a machine. It was my partner. It had hauled the lumber to build this porch, taken the kids to school when the station wagon was on the fritz, and waited for me patiently outside the garage until long after dark. It was an honest piece of American steel that asked only for gas and clean oil, and in return, it gave me the one thing I now craved above all else: freedom. As dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of pink and purple, I started to move. My actions were slow, deliberate, the methodical motions of a mechanic starting a complex engine rebuild. No wasted effort. First, I went back into the quiet house, walked to the kitchen table, and gently, with both hands, picked up the box of Ellie's ashes. I didn't wrap it or hide it. I carried it out to the truck and placed it on the passenger seat. "Buckle up, honey," I mumbled, pulling the seatbelt across the plastic container. "We're going for one last ride." Next, I packed a small duffel bag, a change of clothes, my razor, an old wool sweater she had knitted for me 20 years ago, its elbows worn thin. From the bottom drawer of the dresser in our bedroom, I pulled out our old photo album, the one with the cracked leather cover. Then I did what I should have done a long time ago. I went to my desk. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found the folder. Inside were the carbon copies of the checks I'd written for Michael's college tuition, the receipt for Sarah's fancy Apple computer, which I'd paid for in cash, and the main exhibit, the bank statement showing the wire transfer for the down payment on her house 3 years ago, a transfer I'd made by draining nearly every penny of my own savings, the money I'd put away for a rainy day. I slid the papers neatly into a large manila envelope. My final move was one more phone call. Not to my kids, to my bank. In a calm, steady voice, I instructed the customer service representative, to cancel all recurring automatic payments from my checking account, including the largest one, a monthly transfer that went toward my daughter Sarah's mortgage. I'd been doing it quietly, just to help the kids out. "Sir, are you sure?" "This payment has been active for several years," the polite young woman asked. "I'm sure," I said. "Cancel it. Effective immediately." No other explanation was needed. It was my money, my sweat, my life. My obligation to fund the lives of people who would store their mother in a basement was hereby terminated. I filled the tank at a gas station on the edge of town. The click of the nozzle shutting off sounded like a starting pistol. I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't have a destination. I just pointed the truck east and drove toward the rising sun. In the old cassette player, a worn-out Creedence Clearwater Revival tape was playing. "Fortunate Son." Ellie and I used to listen to it on the rare weekends we could get away. With her ashes on the seat beside me, for the first time in a year, it felt like she was really with me. Not a ghost in an empty house, but my co-pilot, same as always. I drove all day, the landscape changing from familiar suburbs to wide-open farmland. I stopped only at roadside diners, the kind that have cracked vinyl booths and serve coffee that's been on the burner too long. I sat there, nursing a cup, watching the big rigs thunder past on the highway, and I thought, not with anger or self-pity, but with a cold, clear detachment, like a surgeon examining a disease. I had given them everything I had, my strength, my time, my money. I hadn't done it for a thank you. I'd done it because it was my duty, as I understood it, a contract between a father and his children. But any contract, written or not, is built on a foundation of mutual respect. When that respect is gone, the contract is void. By dusk on the second day, I arrived. I knew the place the second I saw it, even after 50 years. A small, rocky cliff overlooking the Delaware River, right on the border of Pennsylvania. Ellie and I had come here on our honeymoon. All we'd had was a tent and an older, even more beat-up truck. We sat right here, on this cliff's edge, watched the sunset, and dreamed about the life we were going to build. And she'd said something then, something I'd forgotten in the chaos of life. "Frankie," she'd said, "when my time comes, I want to be scattered somewhere like this, somewhere beautiful, with a lot of wind, so I can fly over the river and see everything." My kids didn't know about this place. I'd never told them. It was ours, sacred. And now I had brought her home. I stayed on that cliff all night. I gathered some dry branches and built a small smoky fire. The November wind coming off the river was sharp and relentless, but I barely felt it. I sat on my camping stool, wrapped in that old sweater, and watched the stars come out, a brilliant, endless spray of them in the clean, dark sky. I opened the photo album. The pages were thick and brittle. There we were at our wedding, young and skinny and scared, but fiercely in love. There I was, holding a tiny Michael, wrapped in a blanket, an expression of sheer panic on my face. There was Sarah, beaming in a goofy prom dress that Ellie had stayed up half the night to alter, a whole lifetime pressed between these worn leather covers. I looked at these frozen moments, and the anger was gone. All that was left was a deep, quiet sadness. A sadness that all this had happened, and all this was over, and all that remained was a box of ashes and an ache in my soul. At dawn, as the first light of the sun began to paint the clouds over the river in strokes of pink and fiery orange, I knew it was time. I picked up the box. My hands were steady. I walked to the very edge of the cliff. The wind whipped my gray hair across my face. Far below, the Delaware River flowed. dark and powerful. "Sorry I'm late, Ellie," I said aloud, my voice raspy in the morning stillness. "I got lost. Lost the map, but I found my way home now. Our home." I pried the lid off the container. I paused for a second, looking at the coarse gray dust. Everything she had been, her laugh, her warmth, her touch, reduced to this. Then I simply turned the box over and emptied its contents into the wind. The wind took it instantly, catching the ashes in a swirling cloud, lifting them high into the morning air. I watched as they danced and spun, carried out over the river, disappearing into the golden light of the rising sun. I watched until the very last speck was gone. I had let her go. I had fulfilled her real final wish. And in that moment, what I felt wasn't grief. It was release, a profound, bone-deep release, as if I too had been scattered on that wind, leaving the old me, the hurt, the bitterness, and the endless sense of obligation behind on that cliff. I stood there for a long time until the sun was fully up, its warmth on my face. Then my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It had been on the whole time. I pulled it out. The screen glowed. 37 missed calls. From Michael. From Sarah. And a new one was coming in now. Sarah. I stared at her name for a long moment before I finally answered. "Dad." "Dad, oh my God. Thank God. Where are you? Michael and I are going crazy. We got here. The house is empty. And... Dad, what happened with the mortgage payment? The bank called me this morning." Her voice was shrill with panic, and it was clear which of those two things was her primary concern. I listened in silence as she talked, a torrent of panicked questions and accusations. "Dad, we were supposed to talk about everything. What's going on? Where did you go? Are you okay?" That last part was an afterthought. "I'm gone, Sarah," I said, and my voice was calm and hard as forged steel, a voice they had never heard from me before. "I took your mother where she always wanted to be." "Where?" "What do you mean, took her?" "Dad, what did you do?" "We were going to do something, all of us, something beautiful." "You had your chance," I said, cutting her off. "You had 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. A heavy, stunned silence fell on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that means reality is finally, painfully, sinking in. "And as for the house and the money," I continued in that same even tone, "we won't be talking about that anymore. It's my house. And my money. I held up my end of the deal. I raised you. I educated you. I helped you get on your feet. My obligations are met. From here on out, you're on your own." "But Dad..." "We're your kids," she whimpered. "I'll be back when I'm back," I interrupted. "Or maybe I won't. I haven't decided yet. Don't wait up for dinner, and tell Michael to cancel his appointment with the realtor." I ended the call before she could reply. I turned off the phone and tossed it into the glove compartment. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I climbed back into my old F-150, which smelled of dust, gasoline, and newfound freedom. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life with a low, steady, comforting roar. I didn't turn back. I pointed the truck west, into the heart of the country, away from the rising sun. I had no idea where I was going. Maybe I'd look up my old army buddy, Bill, down in Arizona, see if he still wanted to go fishing. Maybe I'd drive all the way to the Pacific and just sit on a beach and watch the waves roll in, or maybe I'd find a small town somewhere in the middle of nowhere, rent a room, and finally buy that old boat I'd always dreamed of, just to have something to tinker with. For the first time in 50 years, the road ahead wasn't mapped out. It was empty and open and all mine. My family might try to find me. They might even begin to understand. They might try to apologize. But from now on, the rules were mine to make. They might get a second chance, but it would be on my terms. I was no longer their quiet, dependable, fix-it-all father. I was no longer a ghost at my own family's table. I had restored dignity to my wife's memory, and in the process, I had finally, unexpectedly, reclaimed my own. In the rearview mirror, I could see the road I'd left behind, bathed in the morning light. But I wasn't looking back anymore. I was looking forward, at a new life, just beginning. At 70 years old,